A pleasant good afternoon to all. Welcome on behalf of the 𝗟𝗲𝗪 Institute for Research and Debate of the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies. In this, our attempt to commemorate Labor Day 2023, we are hosting a series of activities beginning today all through to the 30th. We are looking at commemorating the legacy of labor. We are hosting today review of labor law in Trinidad and Tobago, tomorrow strengthening collective agreements, and on Thursday retirement and social protection. You all will recognize the importance and timeliness of these discussions as it relates to working people. As usual, we as a college are attempting to remain relevant to our country, our region, and by extension, our world. Today, we have with us Mr. 𝗟𝗯𝗪𝗂𝗏 and Mr. 𝗟𝗲𝗏𝗪𝗏𝗏𝗏, who I would prefer. It's good that I talk about them, but it's always good to hear directly from the horse's mouth. So I would like to call on Mr. 𝗟𝗯𝗪𝗪𝗏 to tell us a bit about himself before we embark on this very engaging topic today. So Mr. 𝗟𝗯𝗪𝗪𝗏, could you
Well,
please tell us a little bit about yourself?
thank you very much, Madam Chairperson and comrade. It's always a distinct pleasure to be here. Um, and my bio is very simple. I am 𝗟𝗯𝗪𝗪𝗏, a national of Trinidad and Tobago who is very interested in leaving it better than I met it.
Mhm.
And nothing will come in the way of my pursuing that objective. I am still involved. I still with the Guardian Group as a consultant and advisor in the office of the group CEO. Um, I am still chairman of the 𝗟𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, having a lot of fun, enjoying the young people at the 𝗟𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, seeing them grow and develop. So that's who I am, and I really look forward, as always, to making a difference.
Yes.
I am currently doing a lot of coaching and mentoring. That's my passion. And that's, again, an integral part of leaving it better than I met it.
Thank you so much, Mr. 𝗟𝗯𝗪𝗪𝗏𝗏. And we know the session today would not go the way we wanted to and benefit without the participation of our listeners. So we want to invite those of you who are on the live. Feel free to ask questions to our panelists. We heard from Mr. 𝗟𝗯𝗪𝗪𝗏𝗏 how much he has to contribute, and he wants to leave us better than he met us. So feel free to like, share, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to ask questions in the chat box. It will be directed. Indicate who you want to answer the question. Be clear and concise, yes, so that we can engage meaningfully this evening. I would like to call now on Mr. 𝗟𝗏𝗪𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 to tell us a bit about himself.
Yeah, Michael Anthony, a humble dock worker,
Yeah.
as we see from Duxford University. All right, I have been involved in the trade union movement dating back to 1975. The General Secretary of the National Trade Union Center, also the General Secretary of the Caribbean Congress of Labor, and also the Vice Chair of the ITA seafarers maritime sector for the Latin American and Caribbean region. My passion has always been to ensure that the rights of the voiceless and the disadvantaged, pensioners, and more particularly single women and our youth are articulated. And I see myself through the National Trade Union Center as a voice for the voiceless. I continue and will continue to advocate for trade union rights, social justice, decent work,
Yes.
and for our society to respect our women folks. The question of gender-based violence is a deep concern to me, and I can speak for the trade union movement. And therefore, that is one of my platforms. Additionally, the issue of making our workforce adaptable to the growing changes of the workplace and the world of work by educating them, by giving them the necessary skills, is one of the platforms that I continue to articulate for. And more importantly, the issue of housing, as you know, as trade unionists, the Siemens Union and also the NUGFW would have embarked on a housing project that is not responsible for providing adequate housing at adequate money for workers. And therefore, this is Michael Anderson, the humble dock worker, and also the President General of the Seamen and Waterfront Workers Trade Union. So thank you for the opportunity that has been given to me to allow me to articulate the views of labor and in some instances, my personal views on issues affecting the economy, labor, and the whole question of where do we take social justice as a society. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Mr. Aniset. And I am the moderator for this evening session. My name is Janice Johnson-Lord, lecturer at the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Study, and also a graduate from such an august institution. Valuing what we at Cipriani College do and can continue to contribute to the lives of working people and society as a whole. This session is particularly interesting today. And Mr. Aniset, I know you left out that you are one of our parliamentarians. So I think you are one of the person that we can really, really depend on to engage on this particular issue of law and the adequacy of our labor laws to protect not just working people, but those stakeholders that are party to that working relationship. Because we know Mr. Nanku is still a member of the 𝗟𝗟, and we say where they are employers, they are employees, and therefore we want to find out where we meet in the middle and how can we ensure social justice for all. So my question to the panelists this evening is, are we satisfied with the level of urgency placed on legislative reform? Do we see it being current to the needs of the working people and the working environment today? Either one of you may respond.
Comrade, you want to begin?
Well, maybe I can I can come out here as the first up to bat. And again, to your question, if I should offer a response, it's no secret that this whole question of labor legislation and reform has been in the public domain for quite some time. From the 𝗟𝗟's perspective, when we go back to 2016, we did submit a position paper way back then, which was the subject of discussion at NTAC, that National Tripartite Advisory Council. Quite naturally, as I said, Tripartite Council, Comrade Mayset was part of those discussions, and we put our heads together and we were able to come up with a document which the committee, the council, believe would have been in the best interest of going forward in terms of dealing with legislative labor reform. I don't want to use the word unfortunately, but that's the reality of it. The last thing was that this proposal was sent to the cabinet, and quite naturally, you know the process. There's a process that cabinet will go through in terms of their subcommittees or committees taking a look at it and taking it to the next step. But we have not, with the NTAC no longer being in place, we are not aware of where in the process this is now, is now being stuck. We have the Industrial Relations Advisory Committee, and I rather suspect that, I also sit on that committee, and there have been conversations around the same topic. So to be more specific in terms of responding to your question, Madam Chairperson, the level of urgency really needs some fire. It really needs some fire, because when you look at it, there are so many tentacles that labor reform finds itself. We are operating in a time where you have so many challenges with our youth. And I would like to think, when you look at the world of work and the job market and all the rest of it, labor legislation and legislative reform, people may think that it's not connected, but there are connections in terms of getting people off the streets. There are connections. As I said, the way that the world of work is changing rapidly, you have the introduction of remote work. Okay. That requires serious consideration, because it has become, or it's becoming, a way of life, an integral part of the world of work, and we still don't have the level of clarity from the employer perspective. We are still not very clear as to what's the next step. What's the next step? How do we, there have been so many conversations around, its positive impact upon lives and livelihoods, work-life balance, the length of time that people take to get to and from work. By the time they get to the place of work, they're all burnt out. So they're unable to really deliver at the standard of which that is expected. And I think it's very important that fire, that focus, there needs to be a refocusing on labor legislation and labor reform. Let's stop, just talking about it. And we do have entities, Industrial Relations Advisory Committee is one such entity that advises the minister as part of his remit. Maybe that is something that the whole question of labor reform could in fact be put back on the table as unnecessary way forward.
Yeah.
So that would be my, you know, my response in terms of the urgency, you know, and what makes the urgency so important.
Important, yeah.
All right.
Mr. Annie said?
Yeah, well, the fact that we are discussing this today
Yeah.
tells us that all is not well in the state of Delta. And one has to understand, in my humble view, what is legal legislation. You see, we have a tendency in disassociating the world of work and also the labor market, which is critical to the development of any economy. And therefore, the focus is not placed on the adaptability of the labor market and the legislation that will speak to the real world of work, and also taking into consideration our culture and our history as a region. And I'm speaking not about Trinidad now, I'm speaking as a Caribbean man, because Trinidad cannot survive in isolation. Neither Guyana, neither Jamaica. We are very small region, and therefore the question of the cohesionness of the region is important, even as it relates to the labor market. So that what are the facts? In 1965, it was the ISA. In 1972, it was the IRA. And are there any changes given the new dynamics of the world of work, and given the question of we moving away and going to a digitalization of work, and therefore our adaptability is required? I'm saying all this to tell the listening public that in 2017, which my LinkedIn did not mention, there was work that was done by the IRAC committee, and our recommendations, which involved government representatives, was submitted to cabinet. We are now in 2023, and that piece of recommendations for the changes of the legislation has not seen daylight. So that we have to understand that the question of the implementation deficit that seems to be pervading our society has also extended its reaches to the labor market, the labor legislation, and the requirements that is required in Trinidad in order for us to be competitive in the new world of work. And yes, there is need for an urgency. Yes, and the need must be tripartite in nature, in a nature rather, and it must not be that is something that is just a PR or a window dressing, while workers each day we are forced to face the real realities of the world of work. We cannot continue as a people and as a society to not recognize the question of social dialogue, the question of social justice, and the question of labor legislation that will speak to our economic on the new world of work. In the absence of that, Trinidad and Tobago will suffer. And I'm making a plea as the General Secretary of the Caribbean Congress of Labor for this issue to be addressed within the region so that the Caribbean as a region will be adaptable, will be flexible, and will be able to develop the kind of labor force with the requisite labor legislation that will speak to our economic and social realities. Thank you.
But Mr. Anicet, I want to tag on something you mentioned there. I think both persons spoke to the issue of tripartism.
Yeah.
So is it now that we're saying it's time to reconsider the move away from the table of discussion? I mean, they might have had precursors or antecedent condition that brought about that unified position of walking away from that dialogue, as it were. So my question is, what are the challenges that we see ourselves facing in bringing about the change to existing legislation? One of which is that aspect of meaningful consultation that will encourage us now as Labour to go back to that table for meaningful discussion. What are some of the challenges that either of you envisage in terms of, because we want to start national, because if we can't get it together nationally, I'm wondering how much more challenges we will face going regional.
All right, from where we sit within the trade union movement, and I think I speak to the whole movement because the two federations would have taken the mature and informed decision to walk away from the NTAC, given the construct of NTAC. Social dialogue and tripartitism is the basic foundation of the ILO, the International Labour Organization, that was formed in 1990. And one of the principles of the ILO, which is the only organization, UN organization, that is tripartite in nature, was on the principle that no world can survive in the absence of social justice. So that when you go to NTAC, e.g., and the trade union movement raises the issue of petrol trade, and let us sit down and discuss that. And you have a prime minister saying that is not our business. When you go to NTAC, and I have one correspondence here, and you raise the issue of collective bargaining and the outstanding negotiations, which was supported by the employers' representatives at NTAC, and the government, through its Minister of Finance, who never attended those meetings and who was part of that committee. Well, then the issue of the seriousness of social dialogue and tripartitism, which is a foundation of the ILO, for which this government is part of, and which is ignored. So the question is, are we really serious as a government to recognize that social justice is impinged on the question of genuine social discussion and tripartitism? Let me give you an example. Barbados. who is living, sleeping, tasting, seeing, hearing tripartitism. And when Maya Motley took office, there was 4 weeks of foreign reserves in the coffers. And you may recall that they had to go to the IMF. And what the government did, they called the social partners and they sat down and they discussed maturely, they disagree, but they came up with one approach for the betterment of Barbados. And within that period, the IMF advised the government of Barbados not to increase the minimum wages. And the tripartite party stood up and said no. And the minimum wage was increased because the IMF said that if you increase the minimum wage, it will interfere with the economy. The traditional economic thinking. But more importantly, the same Barbados government regularized the employment of over 3,000 public servants against the advice of the very same IMF. Because they recognized that you cannot build an economy on contract labor. You cannot build an economy by outsourcing jobs. You cannot build an economy without regularizing the employment, more importantly, of your government employees. And where are we today, notwithstanding the IMF saying don't do that? Barbados is much better off. It continues to grow. And the public servants and the workers in Barbados are willing to work because they recognize that the government, labor, and employers appreciate the role of labor in the productive force of the economy. And I think it is a lesson that we must learn, that tripartitism, where it is treated in a meaningful way, works, because the ILO research would have demonstrated that clearly. And the ILO conventions one, and the ILO yearly meetings of the 178 countries, where we can sit together and come up with consensus building, has worked since 1990. And I'm therefore, any government, anybody who uses social dialogue and tripartitism as a PR stunt and doesn't give it the teeth that is necessary, we will find ourselves in a situation that we are found ourselves in Trinidad and Tobago. And that is some of the realities that we must face as a people. We must speak truth to power, and we must say enough is enough. And if the government doesn't want to respect the underlying and fundamental principles of what social dialogue and tripartitism means, well, then we as the employer, we as the workers, and I say we as employers, deliberately, we must get together and do what is necessary to save our country, which is going down the economic precipice that will have social discord that we will regret it in Trinidad. Thank you again.
Mr. Nanku, any response?
Sure. I think this topic, has been on the front burner for many years. It's no secret. But I would just like to, I don't want to belabor the point, because we are all aware, and I'm sure the listening public, they are all aware of the significance and the power of that tool, that vehicle they call social dialogue. Yeah, it has worked. Madani said, spoke to reference the Barbados situation, which is a fact. And there are so many other countries across the globe who have demonstrated and made use of the principles of social dialogue, and particularly tripartite social dialogue, and they have been way ahead. And when I say way ahead, not without challenges, but they have been able to resolve a lot of their social issues and challenges, collective bargaining, because they all understand, the parties to the conversation all understand this is the size of the pie. Okay? And I think it is driven from a place where there is a level, there's a leveling of the play field when you sit around that table, that it's not about I am in charge and this one is less than. More than it is about the individuals who sit around that table, notwithstanding who they represent, are seen as equals, and they are treated with the respect that they deserve. You know. Now let me fast forward. I am, even up to today, I am showing up with hope. I'm showing up with hope. And my plea, I've made it before, and I'm making it again today, with the hope that someone will recognize that this is significant. There's a significant course of action if we need to go forward. And that is, as social partners, there's a call for us to adopt postures of not standing against, but talking with. Not having a face-off, but facilitating meaningful dialogue. I call as well for a return to that, the most powerful component of communication, which has become so scarce, notwithstanding how critical it is, the power of listening. Listening empathically, listening to what is said and what is not said, listening for meaning, and more importantly, listening to our silences. I'm of the view, both, and I speak as a national, I speak as the chairman of the Employers Consultative Association. Let's rekindle that fire of hope. And as I said, I am of the view that it is about what is in the national interest. I know there are varying views around that, what is in the national interest. But that's my plea to this audience today. Let us come together and adopt postures of not standing against, but talking with. That, to my mind, will allow us, notwithstanding our differences, to bring the conversation back on track. That's my hope.
It's our hope, Mr. Nanku, because I'm listening to the phrase social dialogue. And yes, we have legitimate and institutionalized partners in the discussion. But if we were to poll and look at what percentage of our working people are unionized, that in itself is a conversation. So the question to me is, or to us, to what extent we really want to engage in social, to me, societal discussion in terms of the way forward. Because there are those persons who are not unionized feel voiceless. One may say it's a choice not to be unionized, but we understand the demographics. I know you mentioned the issue in terms of Barbados. Comrade Anisette mentioned the issue of contract labor. So we have a vast portion of our working people who do not have a voice at the table by virtue of not being unionized. And therefore, the question to us is, how do we encapsulate the interests of working people as a whole, or do we stand on sectorial interests and just representing or putting forward the view of our membership, which is in a minority in terms of working people? Are we in a place where we can stand for justice for all, despite or whether or not they are affiliated to us? Can we look at national interests, the interests of humanity as a whole, in terms of what is best for working people and for economies? The question to us is, what are the challenges that we are facing in terms of coming together? Can we identify those areas to start with where we agree, so we can reach agreement, and then we can hash out the areas where we disagree? Do we have a starting point? So we say, listen, we agree to A, B, C, let's work on that, and then we can build from there. What is preventing us from taking that approach?
All right. I want to take that, because if we are not brutally frank, if we are not honest with ourselves, and we continue to sweep under the carpet the realities of Trinidad and Tobago, because I see you confining to Trinidad and Tobago, and I will do that now. How do you talk about where do we start in the first instance, where we have a government who is practicing contract labor, and where almost 65% of the government employees are contracted labor? That's the first issue. Let us be honest with ourselves, right? Because the government has a particular role. The government is the biggest employer in Trinidad and Tobago. And therefore, if the example of the government is to have employees working for 10 years, 15 years as contract laborers within the government service, herein lies the underbelly of the problem in Trinidad and Tobago. So we have to deal with that first, right? Where you have a government who have employees and 13 years, and as much as 2007, those workers haven't gotten any increases in wages in order to survive with the exponential increase in cost of living. What do you expect? You see, our structure in terms of politics is in a particular way that is not all embracing and is not all inclusive. And while my learned friend has hope, my reality is that you must demonstrate to me, not in words, but in your actions, if you are serious about Trinidad and Tobago. How do we develop a society when a percentage of people takes almost all the pie and we have a galloping and growing income gap and wage gap. When household incomes are unable to keep up with the growing cost of living, those are the realities. We have a wealth gap in Trinidad and Tobago that is frightening. We have a system in Trinidad and Tobago. Example, food. There is no food security. Why? Because a certain group of people are control of the food market in Trinidad and Tobago. So those are economic and labor realities that speaks to a particular political system where the rights of labor, the single parents, the single women, the youths, it is placed in the back burner. And when you have a leader who says that the luxury liner have to raise in order for the pirogue to raise up, you know, and Trinidad know, that we are in deep problem, because that has never happened nowhere in the world. American economy grew during the World War, and how it grew, they were able to involve the country in the development of the economy. And that is our problem. Let us face the reality. Let us call a spade a spade. And I'm not prepared in this kind of conversation. And I want to thank Cipriani for having this kind of conversation and the length of time in which they have put it for. Because we have to start to get serious. I have a responsibility as a father, as a grandfather, and a great-grandfather to leave a legacy for our children, because this fight is about them. And how do we change that? How do we justify that in particular contract you could call the major company who gets government contracts and no mechanism is put in place to ensure that we enfranchise and empower workers and the other disadvantaged communities? Those are the issues. That is the, and you know, I want to read up something. Yeah? Why social dialogue practices may differ from country to country. Freedom of association and the effective recognition of the right to collective bargaining are the key preconditions for effective social dialogue in any national context. It's not Michael Anicet saying that. The ILO since 1999 recognized that collective bargaining and the right to join an association is a core fundamental principle of social justice and a principle for the growth of any economy. But when we have a policy of outsourcing and contracting out jobs and not giving workers wage increases, and in this instance, I'm talking about the government, because I wish to put on the table, and I compliment the private sector, that within the very said period that the government have not given wage increases, I ask the question, is Trinidad and Tobago aware that the private sector would have given wage increases at a minimum of 9% over the 3-year periods? And the question, listeners, we must ask ourselves, If we are in an economy, as we are made to believe, where we are not making money, but the private sector can extend wage increases to their employees, who is a critical component of the economy, because you cannot have an economy without workers. And they are able to do that. Is it a fact that we do not have money? When you understand what economics is, if there is a recession or whatever that you have, like in 2008, the financial crisis, is everybody suffered? Everybody suffered in that crisis. Unlike Trinidad and Tobago, we are seeing business who is still galloping in terms of increased profitability within an economy where we are made to believe that we do not have any money in order to give more than 4% over a 6-year period. But when we ask for disclosure and we ask for the data to support what you are saying, it is not coming. You are just getting a simple whisper by the Minister of Finance or a Prime Minister who goes on a political platform or who is talking to his constituency and say we cannot give more than 4%. And if they ask for the back pay, they will get the back pay, but they will lose their jobs. Is that social dialogue? Is that honesty? Is that fairness? So let us call a spade. And until we can transition into the real realms of social dialogue and tripartitism, which I will do again, allow me just to read this. And this is the ILO policy as it relates to social dialogue and tripartitism. The main aim of social dialogue and tripartitism is to promote the democratic involvement of the main stakeholders in the governance of the world of work. Can we say that is applicable to Trinidad and Tobago? And I will leave the listening audience to digest it and answer the question rather, yourself. Thank you again.
I want to preempt Mr. Nanku's response and just take a little question inside there, because when we say we, I think we're talking about all of us. And I'm falling back on the under 22% membership in the trade union movement, which I think is an institution that can really help to bring about social change. But in my mind, one of the aspects of trade unionism is that of mobilization, dealing with the power structure and dealing with the politics of the day. Because the very employer we're talking about legislative reform, these are the same persons that we expect and are depending on to amend legislation to facilitate, that same social justice that we're talking about. So where do we start? How do we go about mobilizing? Because we are the employers at the end of the day. When we say government, in my mind, we talk about ourselves because we put them there. So we want to look at our mindsets and how we go about making the decisions relative to who govern in our own best interest. So in my head, it's a matter of thought processes, thinking, our construct, because we find ourselves back in a revolving door, back in the same situation. You would have mentioned ISA 1965, IRA 1972. 1972. In 2023, we still have the Retrenchment and Severance Benefit Act that's inadequate to treat with the needs of persons who would have been, this working people suffered tremendously between 2020 to now. And we wonder, and yes, you have said I brought it back to Trinidad simply because I believe we want to start internally, because we want to think regional, but we got to fix home. We got to look at what's happening home, because when we look into the brother and sister islands, what do we have to contribute that we can say, okay, we're leading a charge? Yeah. So what do we do as a movement, as a people, to influence that social change? Where would we initiate social action, that social partnership? Because all of that is going to feed into social justice. So, Mr. Nanku, I'm so sorry for injecting there, but I think it's important for us as working people, whether we're fixed term contract, whether unionized or non-unionized, do we know the power and the influence we hold as individuals and collectively to bring about the change necessary? Yeah?
Well, I had a smile because um, I've listened to the comrade, and I'm saying to myself, what he has done is reiterated the issues and challenges that we are all facing. Okay? And the question is, which is what you have been posing and what this forum is about, where do we begin to mobilize? Is it the strengthening of our institutions? Okay? Right now, we do not have a national, anything that has the terms of reference of a national tripartite council. Where's the institution? So we need to begin, to your question, where do we begin? Do we begin at Cipriani Labor College? Where do we begin? In 1970, a lot of the ideas and the groundswell came out of the University of the West Indies. I'm not suggesting that we go back to that kind of approach, but I'm just saying that all of these issues, we are well aware. We are well aware that we need to have voice, give voice to the voiceless. Someone should be able to speak for them. Contract employment increases. Again, if you want to give increases, it must be in alignment with levels of productivity. It can't be a disconnect. And don't get me wrong, I am not suggesting that, that the wage increases and where we are, because we had extensive discussions at NTAC about that. And even just to reiterate, the level of interest and enthusiasm, we in fact got a schedule of all the outstanding negotiations, how far back they went. A committee was recommended, a tripartite committee, to treat with that. Of course, no action. So coming back to your question, Madam Chair, and having listened to Comrade Aniset, again, clearly identifying with even greater degree of clarity what the issues are. And you spoke about we don't recognize the power that we have as individuals. Have we been exercising that? Have we been exercising it? So somebody somewhere may say, well, continue to talk. But until you have that collective voice speaking to these issues, we will be here next year talking about the same thing. Mm-hmm. So I am putting it on the table to Comrade Aniset. Let us re-engage and recommit to getting the tripartite organization in some form or fashion working, because that's the only forum that will facilitate the kind of airing of issues and challenges that we are currently facing. And when you look at what is taking place in with Ukraine and, 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 and Russia and all the rest of it, I don't know that it's going to get better in the short term. And again, so members of the tripartite body and tripartite plus, the university, the College for Labor, Cipriani Labor College, maybe the time has come for us to re-engage and to put together an organization or a forum, sorry, that speak to those issues. But just talking about it, we know what the challenges are, we know what the issues are, and we know what is standing in the way. That total absence of a shared common understanding. Where's the shared common understanding? We know it's not working for us. Where's that shared common understanding? Where's that commitment or willingness for us to come together and make it work? And that would be my approach, because what is painful, and the pain is increasing, is to be talking about these issues and challenges and not taking the kind of action, the collective action, as you said, Madam Chair, that the power that resides, we hold the clicker as individuals. We hold the clicker, that clicker that changes the channel. We hold it. But until we are able to come together, united, with that common understanding as to what we need to get us to where we should be, we're going to continue to recreate the same results we're trying to change. We will end up recreating those results.
Well, my question to us, because some of us are more vulnerable than others in the same environment and space. And therefore, when we look at the more vulnerable and the lack of legislative protection, my question to us is, can we identify specific groups or industries that we think need or require special attention that our legislative framework should make provisions for, in terms of ensuring that these persons who are unduly exposed to hardship in the employment relationship. So yes, we're looking at legislative reform for the most part. We have some general areas, but then have we taken the time to identify within our environment those persons and industries that need our focus in terms of legislative provision?
Well, straight up, Madam Chair, you have the informal sector. That's the largest growing sector. And we have been speaking to that. That requires legislation. Okay? Again, we have put up a paper which speaks to the positive and potential impact on the treasury, the reduction, if there is structure around the informal sector, a lot of the social issues and challenges, contribution to national insurance, payment of taxes, and all the rest of it. Those conversations, so if you ask about the group that may be more vulnerable, is the individuals who working in the informal sector. Look at what happened during COVID. When people thought that they were able to get a little $50 or $60 from NIS, when they check, employers not paying, no contributions. You see,
and may I say with impunity.
precisely. The thing about it is, until there are consequences to actions, again, we will continue to be talking about the issues and the relative impact of these issues. And that is why the legislative framework is so critical. You, you have the definition of a worker. The world of work has changed. What about revisiting? This is not the first time this conversation this is being put on the table. The definition of a worker. To incorporate members of the informal sector. You have artificial intelligence. What about the definition? How does the definition of a worker in its current construct speak to that?
Well, Mr. Nanku, let me interject because you preempted one of the questions I have here, because I'm asking us about artificial intelligence and its impact on the world of work. How prepared are we to address issues deriving therefrom? No. How prepared are we legislatively?
No.
Precisely.
You cannot live monologue in a digitalized world. And that is a major issue in Trinidad and Tobago. We are always slow in doing what we're supposed to do. And there's a reason, you know. It is clear in my mind that bureaucracy has its purpose. How do you again, and you see I want to respond to my comrade because he was in intact. How do you reinvent a wheel when your voice is not heard and there isn't any mutual respect or mutual benefit within the context of the conversation? I mean, let us be honest. Nobody is going to get the trade union movement to go back into an intact within the construct of intact, where the Prime Minister has the final say, irrespective of whether or not the hard work, the research, and the collective decisions that we would have reached is implemented. And let me remind my little friend here, when the issue of covered leave came up, you remember we discussed that at intact, and we came up with a framework of how we addressed that in order to protect workers, and it went to cabinet, and it was thrown out. You see, the public must begin to understand that, and then do not say that we will talk and talk and talk. I have learned that if you tell a child something about 7 and 8 or 9 times, it becomes trigger. But I will want to make a point why it is in other countries, South Africa, Barbados, Ireland, and these places, and they have what we call a labor code, as opposed to a minimum wage act, as we have in Trinidad and Tobago. And you see, you must begin to understand things that is happening. Because a labor code is wide and comprehensive piece of legislation that makes it mandatory for an employer to recognize certain labor regulations, occupational health and social benefit, wage and benefit. And you made a point, COVID-19. Big companies in Trinidad and Tobago declaring millions of dollars in profits, did not pay the NIS. And then what must we do as workers? What is the recourse? But more importantly, the government give them a blind. But if I the government, well, crap, oh boy, according to Trinidad, smoke your pipe, you have to find money to pay them. And the point that I'm making, moderator, and my learner friends, if your political system has been inherited from a past colonial master, and we haven't evolved, and we haven't grown in the context of our social antecedents, we're going to find ourselves in the same situation that we are in presently. It has to do with the political system. If 28% of Trinidad and Tobago vote, who get the highest vote becomes government. But you know, as a trade union, I have to have 51% of the workforce in order to get recognition for the purpose of collective bargaining. And if I have 49%, I cannot represent those 49% of workers who would have reposed confidence within the union. But to run a government, 28% will make you run a government. Nobody talks about those kinds of things. That is a reality. Why it is that the 49% of the workers cannot be represented? Who came up with 51%? And why is 51%? Why it is that we have matters in the recognition board that has been appealed with big lawyers that is going on more than 15 years now?
But Comrade Annie said, let me pose a question to you here. Because that very same first past the post system that we speak to in terms of national elections, we see that same system being utilized internally in the internal political system of the trade unions. So let's look at it. So you have a trade union that are having their election. So let's say their membership is 6,000, but only 3,000 turns out for election. Who determines, when you look at the presidency and general secretary and so on, the quantum of vote they amass as in comparison to the entire membership is a minority. So we say we see a replication of the same system. And therefore I'm saying to us, when we speak, and I'm borrowing your own cliche, speak truth to power. The union in and of themselves, and I'm saying this to say, because I'm part of working people, we got to start that change from within ourselves as well. Because within the trade union movement, you may have a person attaining the position of president or general secretary with less than 20% of the membership's vote. So it is the same system that we are replicating. Can we say the change starts with us? That way, when we set the example, we now have a moral authority to stand and say, listen, if we can do it, so can you. That's one. The next aspect of it, when you look at the history of union leaders getting involved in mainstream politics, the question for us is, to what end? What has been the impact? We can track ministers of labor and so on, ministers of education, way back into our mainstream politics. And the question remains the same. What impact is labor having on policy formation, legislative reform? Are we joining red, green, black, yellow for other motive other than advancing the cause of working people? Yeah. So we're dealing with a human element in a number of aspects, because our government, as we label, comes from among us. Yeah. We identify individuals and we vote for them despite their capacity or lack thereof to speak to our issues And I think I'm referencing Barbados as well. It is why she's touted as the Prime Minister of the Caribbean, because few of our leaders go on international platform and are brave enough, knowledgeable enough to speak to our issues. And therefore, we need to look at ourselves. How do we go about determining who represents us? And this starts from within our communities, local government elections. How do we go about selecting an MP? Are we still going on popularity as opposed to capacity? And I think if we drill down at the individual level and say, listen, I may not like Michael Anisette, but his experience, he's knowledgeable, he has the drive and the passion, the intent behind it. He has a purpose that put him there. I like Mr. Nanku, we could drink some beers together, but he does not have the capacity to speak to our issues. Are we going to look at the model that we utilize when we determine who we vote for? Are we in a place where we can challenge? What are you bringing to the table that satisfies our need? Yeah? What are you bringing to the table that convinces me that if you're placed there, you can represent our interests? Yeah? Because you have people go in, and when you ask them how the meeting was, the food was good. The food was good. Ask them to give feedback and report. And these are some of the realities must deal with as labor. Must deal with, because we can't talk labor and not talk politics. We can't talk labor and not talk economics. Yeah. But we confine the discussion to just employment relations and employment issues. But if we look at the wider context in which we exist, yeah, we have to get that conversation going in a meaningful way and seek, one, to market the trade union movement as more relevant to life rather than just to working issues. Because IR is life. I teach that in the classroom. It's life. Everything we do as people in and out of the workplace will impact, as you said, generations to come. My question to us, where do we start? Which piece of legislation we see as being critical to start to address the issues of working people? Can we look and say, listen, 1972, tool, 1985, and how do we now mobilize? How do we mobilize and bring about that social change that we need? We got to come up with a strategy.
Okay, allow me to answer. The first point that I will want to make, the ILO in the wisdom talks about Convention 98, that's the right to organize, the right to collective bargaining. And that is something that must go across the board. And it has nothing to do with whether you are contract laborer or you are outsourced, which is a new way of undermining the trade union movement. Okay? And when we talk, we must understand history. As I always say, Michael Mann, Eric Williams, Burnham, Gary, and I could go on, and all, Barrow, all these leaders, they came from within the trade union movement. The circumstances and the time is quite different to now. We would have attained independence, and we changed what I want to call the colonial masters. And we put on our clothes, or people looking like us, with the expectation that you will get changes. And that has failed. One. The second point I want to make, history again. And I want the listening public to understand. Eric Williams set up a commission of inquiry to look at the poll question in the first pass, the polls. Don't forget that. And when he issue of proportional representation was recommended. That was shown in the waste paper basket, and it said proportional representation is a dagger to the heart of PNM. Right, that is one. I share the view that the question of enfranchisement and empowering communities and individuals is the only way to move forward. There must be a level of enfranchisement and empowerment. And in the absence of that, we cannot move forward with the greatest respect. Now, let us talk about things in the trade union movement that nobody mentions. Are you aware that Siemens Union and NUJFW formed a construction company and have been able to build houses, reasonable houses for its members? One. Are you aware? Are you aware that the trade union movement during the COVID period would have gone on a drive to feed thousands of workers and people within depressed communities? Are you aware that the trade union movement would have entered into a relationship with WePay and formed a mechanism which was green loan, where our members could have accessed $5,000 at a minimum amount of interest in order for them to survive? Are you aware, as I speak to you, that for the last 5 years, we have been trying to get approval by the cooperative body of the government so that we could have run a food co-op? Are you aware of that? Are you aware that we are not...
Mr. Annie says, let me stop you. Let me stop you for a second. The fact that you're asking, are we aware?
Yeah.
And it speaks for itself. And I'll tell you why. Because you ought to be saying to us, you all are aware that so and so. The fact that you're asking, are we aware, is indication of something.
No, well, I am using are you aware on the basis of what you said.
No, but I'm saying, if we do a poll,
of some of the things.
No, but hear the question. And
that the trade union movement is not only about collective bargaining. The National Trade Union Center of Trinidad and Tobago has leapfrogged into areas outside of the collective bargaining where we are addressing education. We are going to do a launch on the 7th, and I will invite you, where we are partnering with an institution, an educational institution, to bring education to our members and their family to make them ready for the world of work, because we recognize that our educational system in Trinidad and Tobago does not speak to that. So I will invite you. So the
I take your point. Stick up in first. I take your point. Just now, we don't want to fight. We don't want to fight. What I'm saying to you, comrade, with the greatest of appreciation and respect, is that Cipriani is here.
Yeah.
Are we aware at this point in time, ought to have been Cipriani, ought to have been person helping to ensure that the country is aware? You with me? I'm saying this to say that when we are doing these good benevolent things, they are kept too quiet and too silent. And if you do a poll now and you ask this country if they're aware, I'm almost certain you know what the feedback would be. Yeah. So I'm saying to us, how do we partner with the trade union movement? How do we help to make things better? So we move away from we. So when we say we are doing, it wouldn't just be the trade union movement doing, because the movement is going to expand now to society, which underpins the whole thing of social justice. You with me? It has to start with somebody. So if it starts with you, I would anticipate, and particularly going forward, this is a good place, going forward, that when something is in the making, we say, listen, we need this information to get to Cipriani. The lecturers will make sure the students in the class are aware. Cipriani will ensure the other stakeholders are aware. The business community must be notified. And that way, we get inclusion. So while we solve the other issues, the things that are being done, some of what you mentioned, I'm aware of, all right, new housing and so on. But there's some things that we don't know. And I'm saying this to say, most of us who are labor studies lecturer, we impart and we encourage our members when they show apathy for trade unionism, we show them the importance of being a member. We're not telling you who to choose because you have the right to choose. But a lot of persons do not see any benefit to them. What you're speaking to, we can identify it in terms of the same aspects of trade unionism, in terms of the member service and self-fulfillment and so on. But a number of persons, they go through an aha moment in the class because they are not aware that the trade union is about all of this. I'm not talking about PR. I'm talking about members being so fulfilled or satisfied by the quality of representation that they encourage their peers to join. We know the Industrial Relations Act has a provision for the agency shop order, but we know that in itself and its mechanics, yeah, and it's a bit of coercive. Why can't we show the value to people, working people's lives, so they can feel a part of, and we can strengthen the movement, yeah? Strengthen the movement so you can do more because now you have access to more, yeah? With more, we can do more. So I hear you. I know of a number of things that the trade unions do and continue to try to do. But I'm saying if we are involved, if we know more, we can support more, and the trade union as an institution can accomplish more. You with me?
No,
Yeah?
yeah, I would do. I would do, but you see, again, and I don't want to say, you are with the trade union Caribbean Conference of Labor, as you may be aware, have now partnered with Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperatives,
Yeah.
where we have taken the secretariat from Barbados and bring it into the arms of Cipriani College to speak to the very thing that you have been speaking of. And I do not want to beat NATO chest, but if you're talking to the director and other members of your academic staff, we have been in the forefront in working with Cipriani College on a lot of projects and reaching out to a lot of other institutions for funding in order to lift Cipriani College profile. Because we feel strongly that if you talk to anybody about Cipriani College or you matter, or even 𝗟𝗯ance they don't know.
No.
Because that is not being teaching our school as part of our history as a people. I am reading still that Christopher Columbus discovered the Caribbean. So then it has to start, as I continue to say, with a change to the mindset where we decolonize, and as that great leader said, we have to free ourselves from that medical slavery in order for us to develop the appreciation for who we are as a country and as a people. Because 400 years and people could say more of an education system that was designed to make us believe that we are inferior and other people are greater than us, and we are still part of that system, will always speak to some of the issues that we are dealing with. And I want to thank Cipriani College for moving in that direction. And I'm rest assured there are certain things that we are asking Cipriani College to provide us what, so that the academic research and the deep dive into the issues will make the trade union more knowledgeable, so that if you go wrong a table, if you go wrong, you can come here to government, which we have done, and which Cipriani College would have partnered with us to do papers to present to the government, and come here as the government, is things that we are working towards, because I understand the point that you are making. And I mean, it is painful to me when you sit down and you see how we can develop Cipriani as the institution of choice, and it is not being funded in the way how it's supposed to be funded. But we are partnering in order to reach outside of the ambit of the traditional funding, so that Cipriani can be independent and can be the force within the Caribbean region in terms of how we develop the working class knowledge base. And then, as I always say, is one thing to have knowledge, is another thing is how you implement that knowledge, because knowledge without implementation is no knowledge. So that I'm saying all this to make the point that all those could be needs, that the government is the growth enterprises, and there are some enterprises that may claim that they have the wherewithal for growth, and they do not recognize, which we have to start to preach. It is labor that fuels that path for growth for enterprises and the economy. And when we begin to understand that, when we begin to inculcate that kind of thinking from the crib to the grave, I am sure you're going to see some of the fundamental changes that we want, because education is so critical. And look, you make the point. People come to Cipriani College and when they talk about the labor movement, they frown, because there is nothing for them to hold on to, nothing for them to be proud of, nothing for them to understand what is the history of the labor movement. Because one of the ways of destroying any society is to take away the culture and to take away your history.
But Comrade Anicet, I want to stick a pin again, because we're talking balance. If we're talking justice, we're talking balance. And if we look at that symbol of that scale, because working people need employers, and when we look at how we see the role of government, we depend on employers and they depend on the government to stimulate the economy. So I want to bring in Mr. Nanku to talk to us as well in terms of the interest, because without employers, there'll be no employee. And not every citizen could stand on his or her own and own a dollar. Some people need a job. So if you don't have businesses and you don't seek and protect their interests as well, right? Because the point was raised, I can't remember if it's by you, the whole aspect of productivity. When we have a distributive approach to labor and labor issues as opposed to integrative, one party will suffer at the expense of the other. And I like the fact that you highlight Barbados as that Tobago model, because it speaks to balancing the interests of the parties to the employment relationship. So it's very important that we factor in the employer's interests, because without their input, our economies will suffer. And we have to accept that as a fact. We do not want profits at the expense of people, but we also do not want people to unduly or negatively impact the intent of business for the most part, which is profit. So, Mr. Nanku, we want to hear from you in terms of, your representative side of the coin, because it's one coin, it's one economy, and your input in terms of the dialogue, the interest legislatively, particularly in terms of the differently abled. They seem to be lost in the discussion in terms of their needs and providing means of income, source of income and opportunities for this particular community and the legislative provision as well.
Well, Madam Moderator, there should be no distinction and there should be absolutely no discrimination. Yeah? Whether you're physically challenged or as the case might be. From an employer's perspective, we look at all individuals who come to the labor force, who are part of the labor force, as individuals who have a contribution to make.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And we have an obligation to ensure that by extension we create a physical environment that will be supportive to enable or those individuals to function effectively. Yeah? So, and you're quite right. You have, if you want to get a bigger slice of the cake, you have to increase the size of the cake. Okay? So when we're talking about, and this is why I said earlier, that there must be alignment between wage increases and productivity. There must be, because the money has to come from somewhere. I mean, some employers would tell you, okay, fine, I will make more money if I leave my money in the bank. I'll get more interest. But that's not the way. Comrade used the word, and I noted it, change in mindset. I think that's one of the most powerful things he has said this evening. Change in mindset. That holding up the proverbial mirror. Because what you see in that mirror, that's the truth. That's the truth. And Madam Moderator, I listened to the discourse. I didn't want to jump into family business. But let me tell you this, go to the head of the class. You are, to my mind, you are absolutely correct. The only way we can, that's where the shift in mindset comes in. The only way we can bring about some of the changes that we have been talking about here this afternoon at this forum is by mobilizing, is about strengthening, institutional strengthening, increasing the capacity and capabilities of those people who lead the organization. Because a lot of the problems we are having here, the world over, is leadership. Leadership. Everything rises and falls on leadership, whether it be in the private sector, whether it be in the trade union movement, whether it be in government, everything rises and falls on leadership. And until we are prepared and to stop the talking and be prepared to take action as to what is in our best interest as a people, and therefore what we need to do to create a future for all of us. All of us. I mean, I remember the days that Cipriani Labor College was a powerhouse. I can tell you back in Nathaniel Critchlow's time over Maraval there, I used to visit there. Okay? Robert Giuseppe, Krishna Narayan, Andre Pollard. That's where we got the talent from. And that is where I would like to see the Cipriani Labor College return, because we don't have industrial relations practitioners in this country. Significantly reduced. I have a consultant, a foreign consultant, who has been working here for the last, 25, 30 years in Trinidad. About 15 to 20 years ago, he said to me, "Kesson, it's a dying breed, both in human resource management and also industrial relations practice." Okay? And as you said, wherever two individuals are gathered, industrial relations, that's the interaction and so on. So that change in mindset is for all of us. It's for all of us to spend the time to reflect and evaluate our experiences. Just today I was saying to some folk, experience, we like to talk about, but look at the experience, check on the experience. Experience by itself counts for nothing until you evaluate the experience so that you can get the learnings from it. That's when it counts. That's when it counts. And I think if we evaluate the experiences that my comrade has been speaking to in terms of the issues and challenges, I am of the view, and I come back with hope, I am of the view, Madam Moderator, some of the things that you have articulated in terms of, particularly, we hold the power individually and collectively. We got to be prepared. It's like an alcoholic, to accept our realities, where we are. Are we getting the results to which we aspire? And if the answer, we're talking about speaking truth, is no, we are not getting the results to which we aspire, therefore we go back to cause and effect relationships. That cause and effect equation, it's done, it's gone. All we are talking about here is gone. That's the effect end. That's the result end. Yes, we can reflect on it. But you know what? If we want to bring about the change that we're talking about here, we have to work at the cause end. What is causing? Is it the behavior? Is it the mindset? Because again, is it our belief system? When you look at it, in reality, beliefs drives behavior, behavior drives results. If you want to change the result, if you're not happy with the result you're getting, you got to change the bloody behavior. You got to identify what is causing the behavior. And if you want to change the behavior, the belief system got to be modified. Because as human beings, most of the challenges, if not all, we have, when you hear people say, "I can't, it's too difficult," and what is this? It comes from the belief system, okay, which feeds in to the habits that are no longer serving us, and we just bury our heads in the sand rather than replacing those habits no longer serving us with habits that do. So, Madam Moderator, that shift in mindset and that word, the power in that word, mobilize, I love it. But we as leaders who sit in leadership roles, we got to revisit what is causing us to be where we are. And let's stop talking about, because as you said, which I smiled, Comrade and I have been talking about the challenges in the trade union movement too, the leadership in the trade union movement. You know, why is it, has the trade union movement, what has the movement done to recognize the rapidly changing demographic of the new member? Who is going to be the new member of the trade union in the next 5 to 10 years? What do we need to do to attract them? What are the changes that need to take place? As I say, I don't want to get into the business. Comrade and I will talk about that outside. But, you know, I'm really pleased. And Madam Moderator, please, some of the ideas that you have expressed, please, I urge you to continue to build on it, develop on it. The Cipriani Labor College has too much of a powerful role to play. It's a danger in the industrial relations climate that we are talking here about today, and the fact that it's not working. It's not working in the way it should be. So that would be my 2 cents.
Thank you so much, Conrad Danku. Conrad Aniset, any final words for us in this discussion? Because tomorrow promises to be even more interesting because we're looking to strengthen collective agreements. And I'm reminded of that particular topic because I want to highlight an area that you raised earlier. Not that we glaze over it. As a country, as a nation, we must recognize that there's though somewhat deficient and old in some areas, the Industrial Relations Act speaks to the duration of a collective bargaining agreement, 3 and no more than 5 years. But we've seen the perpetrator, the main perpetrator, in terms of ignoring this particular provision legislatively. And that's why I ask the question, how inclined will the legislature be to change frameworks that will hold them, for the most part, accountable for the atrocity of the treatment on working people? Yeah, so we hear you, fixed term contract for 13 and 15 years. We hear you living on wages for 2007 and 2013. And we tend to politicize the thing by colors, red or yellow or green or whatever. At the end of the day, we employ the legislators, and therefore we must mandate. But to do that, we have to get it together. We have to say, as workers, we employ you all. This is the direction we want to go, and we will not allow you to divide us. So, Comrade Ali said, I want you to give us your final words on this topic in regards to the need for labor reform. And if possible, you can highlight any piece of legislation you think we ought to prioritize so that we bring some level of ease to working people.
Okay. Let me extend my appreciation to you, Mother, and my little comrade. We always have one discussion in a mature and mutually respectful way. Having said that, to me, the issue of collective bargaining is an equalizer. And the legislation must change, in my humble view, to make that a fundamental right, while it's a core convention of the ILO. The construct of the recognition of our union is rooted in bureaucracy. And therefore, we need to find a mechanism which makes it easy for a worker to join the union and get the recognition for the purposes of collective bargaining. That is the point that we want to make. The other issue, which the ILO is now making part of the fundamental core convention, is health and safety in the workplace and social justice for sustainability. So the question is, how do we, as you rightly say, transition to that point? But we cannot fool ourselves in not understanding the economic reality of Trinidad and Tobago when the mad season starts and the bell ring for elections. With all the talk that we're talking, people go back to the race, color, and creed. That's the reality. How do we then collectively break that mold so that people can see, as you say, we are employing you, and I'm therefore you must be able to bring to the table what we want and not what you desire. How do we deal with that? And I will anybody to answer. The election is coming up local and we're going to see the same thing. Notwithstanding our conversation here. All right? How do we break the question of the dependency syndrome when people believe that if I get a house, it's not a right, and that's what the government's supposed to give to me, but they see it as a gift. And I am obligated to you for giving me something that you have been elected to do. The other issue, how do we deal with CPEP and those other institutional framework that has crippled the growth of our society? How do we deal with that? With those handouts that make these groups of people not workers, but people, as I will want to term of voting machine. How do we deal with that? And I want to end by saying, I don't want nobody to misunderstand the trade union movement. There is a role for business. I have no question. There's a role for government. But the point that I want to make, you could invest how much money you want, which is important because there's a symbiotic relationship between investment and labor. But we must also understand, and I cannot finish this discussion without making this fundamental point. It is labor that fuels the path for growth for enterprises and the economy. And if we understand that, the respect for labor and not seeing labor as an inanimated object to be used. I'm not saying all employers does that. But if we violate from the fact that is labor which fuel that pathway for growth for an enterprise and the economy, we will be talking about this year after year. Because if there's appreciation of that, you're going to see changes that is required in order to have this simple word, fairness. Fairness. And let me repeat it again, fairness, which is lacking generally in our society. So yes, the change I will want to see It's how we see workers, whether in the formal or formal economy, can join a union so that the collective bargaining process, which is the equalizer, which balances the scale that you spoke about, must become a fundamental go-to as we end this conversation. No society can survive without
fairness
and decent wages
mm-hmm.
and fairness. That is what we have to inculcate from top to bottom. And I will end by saying productivity is critical to our economy, and it involves all of us, labor, government, and business, because at the ending of the day, we have to live in this country, and if we are not competitive, if we are not productive, we will be left by the wayside, and there will be no more handouts, and our social fabric is going to start to crack up and cause all the antecedent problems that will arise in a society where the social fabric and the institutions that my lone friend talk about, where workers begin to lose faith and trust in those institutions. So we have some work to do. We are willing to work with the employers. We are willing, and we have been doing that to work with Cipriani Labour College, and we are willing to work with the government if the government is serious about engaging us on the basis of mutual respect and mutual benefits. So good night, Mr. Public. I want to thank you all for the opportunity. And we have the ability in Trinidad and Tobago, if we collectively put Trinidad and Tobago first and forget our individual constituents. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Comrade Aniset. Comrade Nanku.
My pleasure.
A few words.
Pleasure.
Yeah. Any few words for us?
No, I would like to reiterate, Madam Chair. I quite like, as I listen to you, I'm of the firm belief that with your years and the work that you have been doing, coming out as a graduate of the Cipriani Labour College, you know, I am challenging you together with your faculty to do as I have committed to doing, leaving it better than I met it.
Yes.
And it's a lot of work, eh? It's a lot of work. I can tell you at 69, I am still at the office at 5:30 in the morning. Some people ask me what is wrong with me, but I'm just, you know, passionate about we have a role to play as leaders, and be assured that you can't allow anything to get in the way of it. Yeah? And this is why I keep saying we have the clicker in our hands as leaders. Yeah? And we need to be able to create that environment to support that shift that is so important.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank both of you for taking time off. I know your schedules are tight. On behalf of 𝗟𝗏𝗪𝗏 Institute of Research and Debate and the college as a whole, as well as the listening audience, I want to thank you all for taking time off to engage in this discussion, because I think this is a good place to start. I also want to remind us that we're back on tomorrow at 10 a.m. to discuss strengthening collective agreements, because it is very important. It was really a humbling experience to me. I appreciate, and as I said, being a beneficiary of what Cipriani offered, being a past student and being a lecturer there now. It's an honor and a privilege to contribute to the lives of working people and the society as a whole. We look forward to your feedback. So if you can go online, fill out the feedback form, Tell us. Tell us what next you want to hear us engage on. This is about you. This is about our country, and you ought to have an input. Cipriani is providing a voice for you to give a feedback on what you've been hearing so far and what you would like to hear going forward. There's so many issues for us to discuss, particularly this issue of remote work, the transfer of the expense for productivity to the worker. Yeah, while we think it's a favor to the worker, we look at the cost to the worker as well. How the environment benefit from remote work. How do we set work-life balance? For some persons like me, I work until 3 o'clock in the morning. We are dealing with life issues. As I tell my students, industrial relations really is life. Yeah, you are a tool to address issues in a different way, with a different approach. And we really look forward to engaging on issues that impact us as a people. But I honestly believe you deal with it nationally, and then we can make a better contribution at the regional level. We can work the two together, but we want to focus on fixing us first. I appreciate the experience. I would have learned a whole lot by engaging with both of you. And I am looking forward to that invite, Comrade Anisette. All right. So that I too can continue to build my capacity and the college's capacity to pour more into people that come to us, come through our doors, or even those persons that we go to do training in their own institution. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you all so much for sharing. And we look forward to engaging with you all again. Have a pleasant evening. God bless you
Same.
as you go.
Bless you.
Trinidad and Tobago. And as I would say, blessed from the divine masters, and may our ancestors continue to guide us and protect us in all we do.
Thank you
My
Thank
so
you.
pleasure.
much. Thank you so much, and have a good evening.
Good evening and a good
Yeah.
night.
Have
Take
a good
care.
night,
Bye bye.
everybody.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye bye.
Bye
Bye.
bye.